I'm Allison from Skydive Vancouver Island. My husband, Gord, the other owner of Skydive Vancouver Island, is also on this call. We started a virtual safety seminar series last year, and we've actually been doing this for our own drop zone for the past few years. There is some good things that came out of COVID, and we decided to continue with it. It got some amazing response and just some really good feedback. And so we've been doing the Tandem one now for, I think, 4 years. And we're really excited to have kind of shared this across more and more people each and every year. I just want to start off by saying that we have amazing presenters today, Erika, Dufort, and John, Kieran. Sadly, Erika has come down with COVID, has completely lost her voice. Her kids are sicker than a dog. And so as much as she'd love to be here, she is not going to be able to present tonight. She just thought it would be hard for you guys all to kind of try to struggle to hear her voice. But she is here, she is in spirit watching and just cheering on, and in full trusting hands with John, who we are excited to have present with us as well today. So just moving on to our next slide, I'm just going to get right into everything. For those of you who don't know Erika made her start as a skydiver in 2005 on Vancouver Island. She went on to become a tandem instructor in 2008 and attended the tandem examiner course back in 2010. Erika has since produced countless tandem instructors worldwide. And when Erika is not doing or teaching tandems, her preferred discipline is canopy piloting. And now in life, she is a mother to 2 beautiful little girls. Both under the age of 2, so she's got her hands full. Her primary commitment is teaching and empowering skydivers to take charge of safety in the sport. And of course, we have John, Kieran. John has been jumping for almost 22 years, full-time since 2004. He started off as a packer, got his rigger's ticket in 2005, and started rigging for Sonic at the Ranch Pro Shop. He started doing tandems full-time in 2007, and has been doing them ever since. He has over 16,000 jumps and around 13,000 of these are tandems, of which most he's packed himself. Last year, he earned both UPT and USPA tandem examiner ratings, and he's also a coach, IAD, and a pro rating, has his pro ratings. We're also going to have Gord on the call today. He's going to help monitor questions and do that. Gord is the owner of Skydive Vancouver Island. He has 28 years experience in the sport. Being a tandem instructor has been his favorite part of skydiving. Seeing the excitement and happiness from a person doing their first jump makes every day working awesome. And he's got that calm, cool effect to just relax people. It's awesome to witness. He's been a part of the Canadian Sport Parachuting Association Board of Directors since 2012. So without further delay, John, I'm going to pass the floor over to you to get us started this evening.
Cool. You hear me? Am I good? I'm not muted?
You sound great.
Awesome. I appreciate you using a picture from like 16 years ago, so I'm not nearly as gray. And I am from New York, so I'm loud enough for me and Erika because she doesn't have a voice. So basically what I wanted to talk about is this is the beginning of the season for I think most of the people who are going to be here. Just going over the things that I think get glossed over in the time of doing tandems. Everybody knows once you get onto a roll, once you're working, it tends to be a little bit monotonous, but we all like what we do. But I feel like certain things kind of get pushed to the wayside a little bit. So that's kind of the stuff I wanted to talk about tonight. Basically wrapping it all up into making good decisions. I think one of the things that Tom Noonan had really reinforced in my examiner course was good outcomes come from good decisions, bad outcomes come from bad decisions. We are in control of all of those things. And I think just like in everything in skydiving with the chains, the links of the various things that lead up to an incident, it's not just one thing. So if we can make better decisions in the little things, it's just going to lead to better outcomes overall. So I kind of wanted to break it up into a little bit of before the jump, during the jump, and after the jump, things that kind of don't fit anywhere else. I'm also getting over a cold, so I'll try to mute when I go to cough, but it's going to happen every now and then, so I apologize. Okay. Gear checks and getting your rig ready. I've seen some really super experienced instructors make some really, really dumb mistakes over the years, things that were easily caught, or you would think easily be caught if you just stopped and took your time with a gear check. A realistic, real world, like, let me take a good solid look at a rig shouldn't take more than a minute. 30 seconds to a minute to actually do what I think could be a very, you know, with turning on your AED and maybe letting that go down, but then going through everything else, it doesn't take long. And yet all the time things get missed. And that's in the beginning of the day. A gear check during the day, if nothing has happened, like a weird landing or whatever, you know, it really shouldn't take long. And anything that things get missed, I mean, I hate to use the word unacceptable, but it's really unacceptable. It's so avoidable. We don't skimp on gear checks. And one of the things that I was taught when I was pretty new was look for things that are done right. If you go looking for something wrong, you'll never find it. For some reason, it just doesn't seem to jump out. But if you look to make sure things are done right, make sure your 3 rings are proper, make sure your friction adapters on your main lift webs are proper, make sure the pin and all that is done right. When it's not, it's going to jump out at you. So just take your time, block out other people. If you show up late, it takes what it takes. Don't skimp on that. Dressing for success, especially early in the season. I know here in the Northeast, it's still a little cold. Wearing something that's got a little more drag. I know in the summer, I'm doing tandems in shorts and a t-shirt a lot of time. And while I do have a lot of experience, I am stacking the deck against myself a little bit. And I know that, but you should give yourself every advantage. If you're new and you've been uncurrent and you're coming back into it, or if you just, you know, took the season off, use that to your advantage. Put on a hoodie, a jumpsuit, long sleeves, whatever. Just give yourself a little bit of that extra advantage, maybe even for some weird ones. A super tall person or a very light girl or something like that. You can change what you wear jump to jump and give yourself that little bit of an edge for something that might otherwise be a little tough to deal with. Wear and tear. Everybody has to deal with their DZOs or their managers and all that kind of stuff, but try to set a precedent of things that just aren't acceptable. Make sure you have closing loops on hand. Make sure you have spare parts on hand, drogues, risers, plenty of rubber bands, whatever, but just make sure that things that, it'll probably last to the end of the day, stop. Like in most of those things, it won't take very long to change. So just do it. If there's a question, there's no question. Like you should never have a broken closing loop, because for it to break, it has to be so bad. So just don't let things like, oh, I don't have time to deal with it. Oh, we're running too hard. Like, guess what? The plane, it can wait. The people who are running the show, I'm sure, are making plenty of money, that while he doesn't want, whoever doesn't want people waiting all over the place, if it's something for gear or something that has to happen, that's got to be something that that stops the show if you need. Yeah, so pre-jump, things like that, just, stacking the odds in your favor. Anytime something like that were to get away from you, you're just starting that snowball rolling downhill a little bit. So just, especially in the beginning of the year, take your time, make sure you do a gear check. I did 7 tandems the other day, and I was amazed at how uncurrent I felt, how it definitely took me, even at the end of the day, it still felt a little bit awkward to just you know, one load I was loading at where the plane is parked. Another load I was out at the runway because we were going hot, and you know, making sure I had my stuff sorted, my student stuff sorted, all those type of things. So in the beginning of the season, just give yourself a little bit of extra time and make sure you're not rushing, and make sure you're not glossing over these easy but, you know, missable things. Moving on to climbing to altitude in the plane, all that kind of stuff. Making sure that you take the time to give yourself a minute, 2 minute, whatever it is, to actually go over your procedures, do your uninterrupted systems check. It's easy to get caught up with talking to your passenger, talking with other people, zoning out, staring out the window because you're smoked because it's 15 jumps in a day. But make sure you at least give yourself some time to do your checks, but also think about things. I have 13,000 jumps. I only have 4 chops. So I have a really, really, really ingrained expectation that my gear is going to work the way it should. So I really try to force myself into thinking about what would I be doing if it didn't, because when it works, that takes no brain power at all. Once you know, have a little bit of experience, your standard systems checks, they're not something that you have to waste a lot of brain power on. So I don't worry about what's going to happen if things go right, because that stuff's easy. Try to spend a little bit of time before each jump thinking about what you would do if your main didn't release, or what you would do if you couldn't get the drogue out, or what you would do if the drogue was wrapped around your foot. You know, it doesn't take much to just sit and think about each scenario, and it'll help keep you current on, you know, it's just like dirt diving. You know, you could do so much more on the ground than you can in the air. So give yourself that little bit of time to just go through that type of stuff. Handle checks in the plane. Take your time to actually go through the procedure. I mean, everybody knows a lot of people slap handles. I'm guilty of it myself. So, you know, in the plane, not only just a quick check to make sure they're there, but take 15, 20 seconds to actually go through each individual one and really think through what scenarios would lead you to need each one of those things. And also a pet peeve of mine, drogue checks before exit. I know some people sit and scoot to the door, some people stand. Hopefully, as you become experienced as a tandem instructor, you have a little bit of, you know, awareness of the space that your rig takes up, and you're not dragging it across the roof of whatever plane you're in. But checking before you leave, the last thing you do is making sure that your gear is ready to jump. And if you one time in your career could stop a jump before you went out of the plane, it would be so much better than dealing with it out there. So just really get into the habit of getting you and your student into the plane, into position, and then just doing that final check before you go. I see a lot of guys, I jump in mostly otters, and I see guys get up off the bench, check their drogue on the bench or when they get up off the bench, but it's something that kind of has to get reinforced to actually check it in the door before you go. Drogue, I don't have a whole lot about drogue fall and all that. I mean, it just, you know, it's, I don't want to say the mindless part of the jump, but once you have the drogue set and checked and you've done your handle checks, you know, not much happens until it comes time to pull. So moving on to pulling, right now it's, it's me coughing, having an open flying cap parachute by 4,000 feet. It's really not that high, especially if our decision altitude is 3,000 feet with the size parachute some people are jumping. You know, it doesn't take that long to get from 4,000 to 3,000. And I've seen some guys try to like cheat it down a little bit. It's great when everything works. So because the last 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 jumps went good, it's easy to just go, I don't need all that extra altitude. We're not doing it for those times. We're doing it for times when things aren't going wrong or aren't going right. So deciding to give yourself that extra time, it's, you know, it's going to cost, you know, a DZO or a manager who's trying to push people 30 seconds maybe, but it's not, you know, it's not worth painting yourself into that corner, because if and when it does go bad, it's going to go bad fast, especially with some of the canopies that we're jumping. You want to give yourself enough time to deal with it. And, you know, we all know that you have various students. I had one this weekend who just needed a little bit more attention as I was trying to go through all my stuff. And I wound up being a little bit long on the spot and had to spend a little bit more time getting back. And that was with me pulling a little higher. So if I had been a little low, it might have been an outlanding. And then an outlanding is, you know, just inviting things that could go wrong. So pulling a little higher, having a safe approach back to the DZ, all of those things just set you up for putting yourself in the bucket of things go right more than they go wrong. The next note I have here is, again, don't get pressured into moving faster for the DZO or just for money. You know, I think about tandems as being in this for the long haul. Like, a lot of times my boss would come to me and talk about how many jumps I could do in a day or all that kind of stuff. And I would always tell him, like, hey man, I'm in this for the year. Like, if I don't make all the jumps today, there's tomorrow. You know, when it comes to weather or when it comes to wind and things like that, the longer I've been doing this, the more I realize that tomorrow is another day. And while it sucks to lose a windy Saturday, it sucks more to lose weeks or months or hurt a student or have something like that, the genie that you can't put back into the bottle. So try to think big picture a little bit and realize that pushing it, not only physically, but mentally, is inviting something to go wrong. So if you're comfortable and you can move at the pace that they're asking you to, fine. If not, if it means, like, I don't know, you skip a jump or something happens, in the grand scheme of your career, that jump is not going to make or break whether you survive or pay your mortgage or whatever it is you do tandems for. Make sure that once you are open, do a full systems check once you're open. Check the canopy, the lines, the slider, the links, the cutaway, the reserve, the RSL, the connections, and do a full controllability check with your flare toggles, and you can find an issue now before you unhook or loosen the lowers and then rehook, or however you get it done. Dealing with a possible issue after that is going to be way more of a problem than finding it before. And it doesn't take much time. A lot of it's visual. My handle checks are physical. It's going to allow you to find a problem. And a lot of times the canopy opens good. A lot of people are flying hand cam. They have other stuff going on. In 10 years, when that student looks at that video, they're not going to know that you checked your handles or whatever. Like, they have no idea. We're not, making Oscar-winning movies here. These people are going to be thrilled with the video of their tandem, whether they see you checking your handles or not. They're going to have no idea. So take that time, do it early, find little problems before they become big problems. The other thing I have in here is I like to maintain control of my students' hands. I think recently there were some issues with students either cutting away or getting their hands into stuff. I make sure my students have their hands low until I have my, controllability check done. I put my students' hands in the lower controls. Not only does it give them a bigger sense of operating the parachute and flying the parachute and being a student and being part of the skydive, it keeps their hands occupied. And it also takes, I think, a lot of the stress out of what they just felt and what they're continuing to feel now by understanding that how the parachute works. And every time I have them pick up their hands, they're very tense. I put their hands in the toggles and I say, hey, loose, like wet noodles. And I get them a little bit loose and I make them pull one, I make them pull the other. And then instantly the shroud of mystery is pulled and they're relaxed and they're calm. And then they fly around and they feel involved, but they don't feel out of control. They know why they're going left because they're pulling left. I like that they get that experience, but I also like that their hands are occupied. And when their hands are in those toggles, they are not grabbing for emergency handles. I believe that this also leads them to be a little more comfortable. I take their hands out for landing around 1,500 feet, and I give them something to do. I say, cool, I'm going to take care of the landing from here. So I'm going to have you let go of those handles, and you're going to hold onto your harness down by your chest strap. And they know where that is, and they grab onto it and they hold, and it gives them a purpose. If someone just says, hey, let go of those, I've had students who go to put their hands out or wave or do that, and I just constantly think about saying, hey, nope, I need you to put your hands back on the harness. I try to avoid the words no, and I avoid telling them things not to do, because there's all sorts of psychology in there about, don't think about pink elephants. So I never tell them, don't reach back, don't look for handles, because when, what might be a nothing situation of a hard toggle turn for us could feel like a life-threatening emergency for them, and they go reaching back for stuff. So I give them a job, I keep their hands occupied, and I also, and this is a little beyond the scope of what I'm looking to do tonight, but when I'm flying my parachute, I also use my elbows to protect my handles anytime they maybe let go because they're waving or flying their hands or doing whatever. So just keep their hands occupied, give them something to do. If you're not comfortable having people steer, I understand, but just give them something to do. Hey man, here's this part of the harness, you hold on, that's your job. I'm going to take care of everything else. So it's something that's minor, but could turn into a catastrophic problem if it ever were to go that way. So if you give them something to do, I feel like it's kind of taking that more out of the equation than not. So one of the last things I have down here is, at whatever DZ you're at, whether you're part-time or full-time or whatever, create a culture where it's okay to say no, where it's okay to say no because of gear, because of weather, because of students, size, weight, intoxication, any number of things that you feel like could be a problem. You gotta have to trust yourself. And if you don't think that jump's gonna go well, or if you feel like that is tipping the scales to leaving things up to chance, try to create a culture where you can say no and it's not unheard of. When I started doing tandems, it used to be, oh, we jump in anything. We'll go in anything. It's like, the tandem guys are going and they go in anything. And after a while, it was, why? Like, is today the day I'm going to pay off my house? Are these 3 jumps at the end of this windy day really going to be what make my season? And I've worked out things with my DZO where if it's a windy day and we used to wait and wind up jumping in the same winds we were always in, I just said, like, hey man, ask these students if they can come back at the end of the day. And if the pilot's cool and all the instructors are cool and we know if the winds are going to die down at sunset, that way we're not feeling pressured because everyone wants to get out of here or everyone wants to just be done with this day. If that's something that doesn't work at your DZ, just get used to being able to tell people, hey man, today's not the day. I've worked at DZs where people would hang out forever. And then I've worked at DZs where like at a certain point they would go, all right, we're going to give it an hour. And if it's not good in an hour, then that's the end of it. And then when that hour hit, they just said, boop, goodbye, everybody. And that was their culture there. So try to develop a culture where you are not, I don't want to say ridiculed, but where it's okay to say no. Maybe get together with the other instructors. I also have to think that I have to think about the conditions for the other instructors. Not everybody has the amount of experience that I have. So things that I would feel comfortable jumping in, I also have to know that there's other guys who wouldn't feel comfortable jumping in that. That can create a lot of stuff going on, but just doesn't mean you have to say no when they say no, but just think about that. But think about making sure that everybody who's doing a jump should be doing that jump and feels comfortable doing that jump. Because if you're already nervous about conditions, you're going to be missing and ignoring things because you're not working in the same brain space that you normally would. Next thing I have here is practice emergency procedures in the most realistic setting possible, at least once a year. I'd like to see it, monthly might be a bit much, but doing it in the beginning of the year and then never doing it again until the end of the season, that's a long time. I was talking with Erika a little bit about a setup that I built last year, a hanging harness. I had access to a tandem rig that wasn't going to be used anymore. So I set up a harness where when I'm doing courses, I can get the candidates, one in the front, one in the back. I can work on post canopy procedures and that. And, Erika had said like, not everybody might have access to that. So we were talking about just setting up and even an in-date rig with dummy handles. There's no reason that you can't take the cutaway and the reserve and the RSL and just hide them out of the way and put other handles in place. So you have a packed rig, get someone in a harness, have them just stand in front of you, hook them up, and then pull some handles. It's amazing. One of the biggest things that I saw in the first course that I taught was how ready my candidates were to know the answer to every single emergency procedure. They knew it like that, and how much it flustered them to then be wearing a rig and then pull the handles for those very same things that they knew the answers to already. Not only did it fluster them, but they also forgot the answers because they weren't just words anymore. Now they were trying to put them into practice. And, most one in particular was like, I'm sorry. I was like, hey man, this is why we're here. We're here so that you can see the difference between just knowing an answer in a book and what it takes to translate that information into action and actually correctly operate the handles. So even if you don't have access to a hanging harness, and the hanging harness is great for mostly just cutaway, but it also, can be a little cumbersome. You can just put a rig on and get someone in front of you in a student harness and just get some dummy handles and just go through malfunctions and procedures, of which, there really are only 3 plus the weird one with the camera, but just feel what it's like. Because, as I was teaching these candidates, I had to, I was real with them when they were like, man, this is awkward. And it's like, hey man, I've been doing this for 17 years. I have 13,000 jumps. I've never disconnected my RSL, cut away and cleared my risers. I've never had to do that. So I'm still waiting for, hopefully not waiting for the time when I'm gonna have to do that. But, you can practice these things over and over and over on the ground and then hopefully never use them. But, take this time on the ground. If you go to do tandems one day and it's rainy or it's windy or whatever, get guys together and just be like, hey man, we're just going to go pull some handles a little bit, because it's, I know people who had gone their whole careers and never pulled handles, didn't do it in their course, and then never did it ever since then. That's not the type of tandem culture we want. I think it would just be better overall if it was just, we weren't those curmudgeon, beat down tandem guys who just, throw that heavy rig over their shoulder and then trudge off to the plane. Not only take it serious, but just, think about how much better it would be to be good at that situation when it happens, as opposed to, oh crap, like now I'm going to have to deal with this. So at wherever you're at with your DZ, if you're a head instructor, if you're not a head instructor, try to make something like that happen. And you'll be amazed that some of the guys then come out of the woodwork and want to do it, because I think we all want to be good at this, but sometimes it's not so easy to be the one to say, hey, I want to pull handles, or I want to go over this stuff. We all think that we should all know it, but we should be doing this stuff consistently throughout our career of doing tandems. I have a little note here, remind people to check handles while under canopy, as well as see and feel the change in location. I think that comes down to the system check and the post canopy opening procedures. physically get your hands on those things, because again, while you're checking handles in the plane and while you're checking handles in free fall, they're in one spot. Obviously they move quite a bit under canopy, but that hopefully is part of your post canopy check and procedure. Avoiding low turns. So we've made good decisions with our gear checks. We've made good decisions in the plane, and now turning low. Like, why? I think there's two, I mean, honestly, it falls into two categories, unintentional low turns and intentional low turns. Unintentional low turns can easily be avoided by probably starting with reasonable pull altitudes, making sure that you're open high enough to be able to get back to the DZ, to do all your checks, and then to fly a reasonable pattern, and making a decision that if you aren't going to make it back to the intended landing area, bail early. And I get it, like we're all in a time crunch and we all have things to do, but it's so much worse to hurt a student than it is to miss a jump or mess up your day. If missing that one jump is more important to you than adding risk to a student and possibly hurting a student, I don't know what to say to that. Like you have to reassess your priorities. Our number one goal is to provide students with a positive introduction to skydiving, but also a safe one. There's no reason in 2022 that they should worry about whether they're going to be hurt after a skydive for something that's avoidable, like turning low into the ground. Intentional low turns, I talk to people and say, while adding speed for landing, what's your reason? Is that for the student's benefit or is it for your benefit? Because over the years, I've seen a lot of tandem instructors who do it for their benefit. They're bored, they want to, swoop, or they just need something extra. I get coming in on a nice student pattern, arms all the way up. It's not going to last forever, but there's safe ways to do it. And you don't need to add additional risk to the student just so that you can, be able to get up in the morning and go do tandems. Like if you can't get excited or, have that student safety as your first priority while you're doing tandems, maybe it's time to move on. So think about why you are making the choices you're doing and why you are doing what you're doing. And if it's not for the student's benefit, then what are you doing it for? Get a student a good landing, yes, but introducing additional unnecessary risks, you're putting yourself in that bucket of it's gonna go bad eventually. There was an incident recently that, while I'm sure there's investigation going on, I have some suspicions that someone was trying to go above and beyond or do a little bit extra. And I don't know, that extra being someone getting taken away in a body bag is not what they signed up for. So, I think we can be reasonably blunt in our community here. It's unacceptable. The coolest thing you can do if someone brings someone to you to take them on a first jump is to bring them back safe and alive. They're not going to remember tons of flips. They're not going to remember swooping a tandem canopy across the ground or whatever. But they sure as hell will remember being busted up or, that you killed their friend on a jump. So if that's a little bit too blunt, but I think people need to really sit and think about the responsibility that we have when we're doing these tandems and who we owe good decisions to. Landing for the student benefit. And then, I think that's pretty much got me to the end of what I'm looking for. Just making sure that the tandem industry is not taking too lightly what we are doing. You got one job. My examiner, when I got my tandem rating, basically laid his little all right, let's kind of scare and give people the fear. At the end of all that, he was like, you got two jobs. You can't drop anybody and you can't bounce anybody. He's like, it's not hard, We're not curing cancer. What we're doing, it's you put someone in a harness, you hook up 4 hooks, you open a parachute, and you slow it down before you get to the ground. There's a whole lot in there involved, but at the end of the day, you just need to put a person in a harness properly, hook them up 4 times. I mean, it's 4, like you can do that. And then properly operate a parachute and then slow it down before you hit the earth. You know, this is not hard, but sometimes I feel like we get carried away with what we do, or we lose sight of why we're doing it or why these people come to us to do it. And I remember, little unrelated, when I got my pro rating and I was doing demos, it was somewhat big demo, big landing area, and I swooped in and it kind of like, off to the side of the X, but I thought I had a great swoop. And then someone came in on a big slow canopy and hit the X, and the place went nuts. And someone came up to me and he's like, man, they don't care about that swoop. They had no idea what you were doing, but that dude just landed on an X, and that's what that rocked their world. I feel like the same thing can be said for tandems. Like at the end of the day, you can add risk with unstable exits, and you can add risk with adding speed for landing. They're not going to know. They don't know. Everybody gets the same stupid questions. Can we do a bunch of flips? Can we do this? Can we pull low? Can we do all that stuff? Over the years, I've had all the various different responses from, yes, and then just do what I wanted anyway, or no and explain it why, but just, they're not going to remember it. If you could just go do the jump, and, everybody's used the line like, oh, how'd you like those flips? Oh, they were great. And you didn't do any. They don't know. Just figure out a way to minimize risk, and you could have a long, solid tandem career. Like I said, I've been doing it 17 years now, 13,000 tandems. I still really enjoy doing it every day. And it's because when I started, somehow I got the notion of looking at it for the long haul and not at the individual jump. It's like, oh, I want to make as many jumps as I can today. And I just thought like, hey man, I want to do this for a long time. And that led me to just build systems of just making good choices. And I don't care. And if that person was disappointed that they didn't do flips or whatever, who cares? They're gone, and I'm gonna have another person in 20 minutes. It doesn't matter. But if you add additional risk, you're setting yourself up to be in a position where you're gonna have to face, situations that I think none of us want to be in. So yeah, I think I think Erika had given me the line, make good choices cool again, or make it trendy to make good choices. Just build a culture within yourself and within the area that you jump to. Just don't put yourself in that bucket of additional risk. There's no payoff there. I'm not getting paid more to do unstable exits than to do stable exits. And it's at this point, like, if you're bored with stable, regular tandem jumps, then get out and go free fly or go do something else, man. Like it's not a benefit to them, and it's not a benefit to you. And it's only rolling the dice more and giving yourself more of a chance to get up Schitt's Creek. So there you go. So Erika had asked me to keep this to around 45 minutes and then get into some discussions and some questions. And I think I landed right around 45 minutes. So there you go.
That was awesome, John. Thank you.
Yeah.
So before we get into some questions and open discussion, I just wanted to let you guys know that we had a really extensive emergency procedure review last year with Erika. So it was a really detailed, dived in really hard into that. So Gord is actually going to post the link to last year's tandem instructor review as well, to dive in further to EPs. So that you'll see in the little chat bar. And then just on my part, and John, you were so perfect in, talking about keeping it simple and all of that kind of stuff. I just wanted to note, I studied the International Skydiving Committee, or the ISC safety survey reports. We just had the stats come out from 2020. And it's really important to recognize that 13% of all fatalities worldwide were with students, and only two of those were actual students, not in a tandem. So, you know, what John was talking about here today is important, because we want to have no fatalities, especially in the tandem industry. So it's important to recognize your limitations, including but not limited to your currency, your skill level, external inputs, and personal inputs. Exercising caution, common sense, self-discipline, control, alertness, and better judgment is highly recommended to help ensure continued safety. So on that note, I also wanted to say hello. Bill Booth is on this call today, and that is a really pleasant surprise on my end here. And so I'm not sure, not that I'm putting you on the spot, but I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add to this discussion as well. But I will also be opening up the floor to some questions and discussion that way. But Bill, if there's anything, of course, that you would like to jump in and talk about, by all means, we can. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say I'm gratified to see you doing this. Safety is the most important thing in tandem. And it's good to hear people saying the jump is for the student, not for you, because we see too many people get bored. So tandem is 40 years old next year, 40 years old. I know. I was at the 20th anniversary and we put 20 tandems in the air out of 2 aircraft, and we're going to try to do 40 on the 40th anniversary. You know, isn't that cool? It's been a long time, millions and millions and millions of tandem jumps. And it's because of education, it's as safe as it is. It's amazing that tandem has a lower fatality rate than skydiving in general does, doesn't it? Because it's potentially much more dangerous. So thank you for doing this. That's pretty much all I want to say. I have 1/10 of the experience, you know, of some of you guys on tandem. And when I made my first tandem jump, I had no training at all. Somehow I survived it, but training makes it a lot easier. So anyway, thank you for doing this. And I'm here to listen. I can only be here another 10 minutes, but go ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm going to open up the floor for any questions, conversation. And again, just to remind you, there is a reactions thing on the bottom of your Zoom where you can actually raise your hand, and then it alerts me and John, my husband Gord as well, that there's a question out there. If you don't have access to the Zoom on here, you can also just go in the chat and have any questions that way. John,
While we are waiting for anybody to maybe get their stuff together, what you had said reminded me about, did you see last year, The Bachelor, that okay. Everybody had a reaction over that. Everybody had their thoughts over that. Everybody had out their pitchforks and their torches and all that other kind of stuff. And when I got to my examiner course, I had a really good discussion about how that particular tandem instructor was set up to fail by being put into a position to be on camera, to land off the DZ, to have the pressure of cameras and a definite landing spot, and you know, all that type of stuff with his experience. And that made me think a little bit about the talking point I had before about being able to say no, knowing when you are over your head, and being able to just be like, you know what, like, while it's cool and I want to do that, I am worried about my ability to do this. And I'm pretty sure he probably had those thoughts, but also the other people excuse me, who were also experienced enough to probably know that that guy shouldn't have been in that position too. So we all have a responsibility, whether we're on a jump or not. There's been a handful of times over the years that I've stopped a load from going when I saw a harness that was, I thought, too far out of the realm of normal. And, you know, there's a little bit of subjectivity in how we put the harness on students. But there's been a couple of times where I had to just be like, nope, that can't go. And I'll be the one, you know, granted, I have some experience and a history with my boss that he knows that if I were to make that call, you know, I believe you, but just know that we have a responsibility to look out for other people. for their gear, for their student, for anything that's going on that jump. It's not just about you. So just, again, try to build that culture of making good choices for you, but also looking out for people who don't know what they don't know yet. So.
Excellent point. I have a question here from Mike Sear. Mike, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hey, I'll start my video here too. There we go. Hear me all right, John?
Yeah, I got you, man.
Good. Hey, thanks a lot for sharing your experiences with us. It's cool. I've never met you before, but it's always nice to hear from a perspective from a different TI examiner as well. We usually sit down with Erika every year here on the island, and she's been really good. And the fact that SVI is hosting this for TIs every year, I think, is really important for all of us. But I want you to touch on something that you talked about with making unnecessary low turns landing your passenger. Now, we've all seen a lot of these unnecessary low turns that you look and you cringe when you see the instructor coming in. You're like, oh my God, like that is just cutting it so close. But we also know that some of the older canopies, and especially some of the smaller square footage canopies out there for tandems, do land better with a little bit of speed behind them. So could you maybe speak your thoughts on the differences between unnecessarily coming in too hot, yet still being able to build a little bit of speed with some of the canopies?
Yeah, of course, Bill Booth is in the room for this one, where the people want to ask me about how to safely add speed. I hope that just as time goes on, canopies that don't land well just get pulled from rotation. Like, if you have to add speed to a canopy to get it to land, it's time for that person who runs that operation to invest in some better equipment. You know, with the price of tandems and the price of gear and the price of gas and the price of planes, and I'll try to come up with a little bit of an actual answer for you before I give you the political one. But if there's a canopy that needs to get hooked to land, it shouldn't be jumping, because what happens when that tandem instructor has to land out in an area where he doesn't have the means to hook it in? And when I say hook it in, I mean, you know, adding speed, whether it's with a braked surge approach or a less than 90-degree turn onto landing. If a canopy can't land well, I don't want to jump that canopy, you know, like, regardless of whether people regularly add speed or not, a canopy flown on a proper approach should flare. And if a canopy can't flare, or the instructor doesn't have either the strength or the technique to be able to properly land that parachute, there's a problem there, you know, and that is before the landing even occurs. You're putting yourself into that bucket of here's higher risk already. And whether you have a perfect technique to add a little bit of speed and have that thing come down and land, solely by jumping that gear, you are putting yourself in the higher risk category. That being said, I think a braked approach with a surge to gain some speed is better, because you're not changing your heading. You are changing the airspeed and the angle of attack of the canopy to just gain that airspeed, and then use that to create a little bit of extra lift. And you're doing it without changing the heading too. And, you know, I think some people forget sometimes, by changing your heading the way you have to with tandem canopies, we're using toggles. There's a reason swoopers stopped using toggles to gain speed, because what it does is it actually slows the canopy down. You get out from under the canopy, and then the canopy speeds up. So if you do that too low, the canopy has no airspeed. You've cast the die, and you know you're in trouble before you even hit the ground, because the canopy needs airspeed to fly. So I think people should be hopefully trying to do more straight-in approaches with brakes, and then allowing that little bit of a surge to then come down and land. If you are changing your heading, if you have to be so aggressive that you are putting yourself into the corner, there's something like that canopy's got to go. you know, the modern canopies, I mean, anything that's been made, I think in the past 5 to 10 years should land. There is some stuff that I've jumped previously and from certain manufacturers that I wonder why people buy, but I don't know. I mean, everybody has their preference, but I'm not going to put any information out there about how to turn to landing better, because I think it's just inviting too much risk into that scenario. So I think if people want to add some speed, they should, you know, with a slight, you know, not a stall. I see some guys also go too far on that end where they're in like deep breaks, almost like a stall. I jump at a pretty windy, bumpy DZ at the ranch. When there is winds, we got lots of trees. So I don't want to be with a slow, mushy parachute right around tree level. So it doesn't take much to give a little bit extra to then be able to have that flare, you know, quarter, half breaks, well timed to just a surge and then come in and land is more than enough speed. Anything beyond that, again, I think you're just kind of painting yourself into a little bit of a corner. And to just, again, one other time, hit that first point. If people are jumping canopies that need or land better, and by land better, it's like, you know, they just have a crappy flare without adding speed, go to the dude running the show and just be like, hey man, like we need something different. I mean, there's even used canopies available. So, you know, to say that new canopies are too expensive, you know, lawsuits from students are expensive, and, you know, bad publicity from hurting students is expensive. Gear is an investment. So, yeah, I think a braked approach can give you everything you need. And if you're jumping gear that can't land straight in well, yeah, I think that needs to be addressed from, you know, from the manager and the operator and the rig owner on. So I know it's not the best answer, but it's the one I'm willing to give.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's kind of what I wanted to hear. And along those same lines, you bring up another good point. I was told this years ago by an experienced tandem instructor that said, if you're going to build speed coming in for your landing, again, if that making a bit of a turn was preferable to a slightly braked approach, because, well, not in all scenarios, but where you may have a turbulent DZ or any kind of bumpy winds, because in that turn, you're now maintaining more of a pressurized canopy, whereas in more of a braked approach, you're kind of depressurizing that canopy, making it a little more susceptible to things like turbulence.
And, you know, depending on the type of turn you're doing, an aggressive toggle turn is going to stop the canopy. You're going to swing out from underneath it. And if we had an airspeed indicator on that wing, it would be low, if not lower than a braked approach, because that thing actually has to come to a stop. You pull the tail, that's, you know, the on a left turn, the left side of the wing stops, and then you swing out from underneath it. So I get the whole, the pressurizing thing also. And again, there is a bit of a rabbit hole here that I am not gonna go down, but if you're jumping in conditions that are so bumpy that you are worried about getting through tree level, think about having a cutaway and having to land a reserve in those conditions, because that is a reality on every single jump we do. So, you know, if the conditions are so bad that you wouldn't want to be flying a reserve in it, maybe that's the time to reconsider jumping in those conditions. Everybody's got to make their living, and everybody has, you know, the prop doesn't stop turning, and I get it, but it doesn't take much to keep a canopy pressurized, and it doesn't take much to keep a wing over your head for landing, and having a student have a safe landing is all that matters. So if we're rolling the dice and increasing those odds of having hard landings solely because we don't have the skill or the gear to be able to fly through those conditions, that's the problem. Not how do we fly this crappy canopy through turbulent conditions. It's let's get canopies that can fly through some slightly turbulent conditions and not have to make me put this student at more risk than just a normal, you know, tandem skydive and landing.
Cool. Thanks.
Excellent. So, John, I have a question that came up on the chat.
Okay.
In your opinion, how many skydivers could follow a tandem during free fall to confirm the security of all? And what skills should they have?
So like how big can a tandem way be? Is that what we're asking?
Well, if Hector's on this call and would like to speak to his question, he certainly can. Yeah, I'm assuming that's, I don't know if you see the question in the chat there.
Yes. So if that is to mean how many people could be out on a tandem, one can get super dangerous. I've had one person on a tandem and regretted it once I was out there when I was somewhat newer at doing tandems. So it doesn't take tons of people to be dangerous. It could be one person. But if you, here's Hector, yeah. Hector, I see you up here. Is that what you're asking? How many people can be out on a tandem? Yes, out on tandem. All right. The more you add, obviously, the more complexity and the more danger you're adding. I've gone on a 10-way with, 9 other relatively experienced jumpers, not as a tandem, as a fun jump. And then things have, there's been a funnel and there's been this and there's been that. And, in my head, it's like, man, if that was a tandem, I can't move. That's crazy. So how many? I don't know, but the experience level needs to be at the very least experienced enough to just be on a jump of that size, let alone be on a jump of that size with a tandem under drogue that can't move. So I don't have a good answer, but I mean, UPT has their limits for RW with tandems. That has to be the minimum. And I would imagine if you're going to have multiple people out on a tandem, they need to have at least multiple tandem jumps, jumps RW with tandems before they're on a big way with tandems. Like and again, I'm not here to write doctrine or rules, but if there's people on there who have never jumped with a tandem before, they shouldn't then be on a tandem big way. So they need to have experience with what it's like falling next to a drogue, with the fall rate changes that can come from one student to another, and the whole break off procedure of getting away from the tandem so that they have room to open and all that. So while I don't have a specific amount of experience for that, if you're going to do a big way, it can't be their first time jumping with a tandem. So that again, that's my answer, not answer.
That's all right. I have another question here from Jennifer. Would you state your opinion regarding seat belts and hooking up the passenger for takeoff? It is my understanding that the best scenario is to not hook student to the tandem instructor until it's time to remove seat belts. So in the event of aircraft emergency landing, that the student can free themselves and escape injury.
Absolutely. Hooking the students up to you and then seatbelting you in is just lazy. I think in this group here, I can be a little bit candid. It's laziness. And I personally think, I don't know if this is actually written down anywhere, but the tandem instructor seatbelting in his student on the back diagonal is also lazy. I think that the student needs to know the seatbelt is on, operate the seatbelt themselves, and know that the seatbelt is on and that they can get to it in case there is a crash. Because one instructor who worked with me for years, we would, his little briefing as we were going down to the end of the plane was, remove the seatbelt, drag my likely lifeless and smoldering body from the plane wreckage and blah, blah, blah. And he would talk about that. But yeah, we can't be hooked together because they need to be able to get off and you need to be able to get off. And one or both of you, may be conscious or not. So the first thing I do when I sit down is I hand my student the seatbelt and I instruct them how to operate it and where to put it around their harness. And I tell them that we're going to take this off at 1,000 feet. And then I put my seatbelt on and do the same. And then when we get up to 1,000 feet, excuse me, I remind them to then time to take your seatbelt off. I've already taken my seatbelt off, and then I'm hooking them up on the lowers, which is my standard practice, even if the door isn't open. I know there's all sorts of configurations with Cessnas and student positions and all that kind of stuff, but at the very least, a student should know and be able to operate the seatbelt on their own without the help from the instructor. You know, skydiving involves all sorts of gear that these people don't know how to use. They know how to use a seatbelt. So have them be that's their job. And then you don't even have to worry about it anymore. So, yeah.
Excellent. Do I have any questions from the floor? If you don't know how to raise your hand to ask a question, you can just say yes on the side.
How do I convince others to do this? I don't know. It kind of comes to creating that culture of making good choices, because what's the downside? Honestly, like, you know, and this might be, I get there's egos and there's attitudes and there's all sorts of stuff that gets involved with doing tandems. And I'm giving this talk where it's pie in the sky, kumbaya, everybody practices emergency procedures. I get it. It could be a little bit far-fetched, but it comes from making small changes. Talk to, you know, the person in charge. And if it's coming from, you know, it is an FAA requirement, everybody on the plane needs to be wearing a seatbelt. And even if it's for connections connected to your harness and you're seatbelted in, that person is not wearing a seatbelt. Because I guarantee you, if the FAA did a ramp check and stopped that plane, that pilot would be getting fined, because he would be flying and taking off without all the people having, you know, proper seatbelts on there. So put it on the pilot, you know, just like everything else. Just, you know, when your rig needs to be in date and you can't jump through clouds, always default to, I'm trying to keep the pilot safe and not fined. So hopefully that works, but also, you know, go to whoever signs the checks needs to be the one to put these things in place. So, because that's the end of the day, that's who's going to be able to make change. So go to the person that signs the checks and say, hey man, if this were to go bad, because think about a plane crash where somebody died and the FAA comes and investigates and they get to say, oh, this tandem student who died in a crash wasn't wearing a seatbelt. A lawyer would have a field day with that. So what's the downside? Legit, like, what is the downside of trying to convince that instructor to just have the student put the seatbelt on? So you get to say 5 less words and be a little bit more of a tandem drone. Like, again, you know, I get that people are burnt out, but it takes just as much effort, actually less, because my student is doing it and I don't have to worry about being hooked up during takeoff. So, yeah, that's my advice. Go to the person that signs the checks, because that's who can make change.
All right, and I have a question from, Gord just lowered it. Gord, you still have a question?
No, that's good.
And then Jennifer, I'll come to you next.
So not so much a question, but John, I appreciate what you're saying earlier on about you know, setting yourself up for success, you know, before the skydive. And I think that even goes towards before the day, as far as, you know, making sure you have food set up for the day, make sure you have water set up. You know, there's not always a time for being able to take a long break or whatever, but, you know, if you can have something on the go and ready to go. Another thing, when you're talking about dressing for success too, I know you're talking about baggy pants or whatever else. I'm a short little round guy. And so I read something, I think that Dan BC maybe issued a few years ago about tandem instructors wearing pants with booties. And I started doing that kind of at the time. I thought, well, that's kind of silly. And then I did it, and my God, it's changed my life. I can control. I'm only 5'7", and I can take a guy who's 6'5", 6'6", and he can't overpower me, because all the power's in my legs with those booties, and it's sort of the best thing that I ever did. So, yeah. So your day starts the night before you go to bed, and think about those things there to make sure you have success the next day. So, thanks so much. Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's one of the things now that I've been working with new instructors and candidates now that I'm an examiner, is I have I'm 6 foot and I have my wingspan and I know what I can get away with. And one of the things I tell, especially with some smaller guys, is like, hey man, you're going to have to work harder than me on every jump. Sorry, just how it is. The guy who taught me how to do tandems was 6'7" and like a bean pole. And he'd be like, oh yeah, it's easy. Just like, just do this and flip over. And it's like, dude, you have twice the leverage on the wind as I do because of that. So yes, like I have my own threshold for when I'll put on stuff to wear. And I tell other people, it's like, hey man, that's going to be different for you. So figure out your baseline. And then I've seen guys do it in booties before. Like I put booties on for some jumps. I was getting my AFF rating last year. And putting booties on was like, man, I forgot how much power there is in that. So yeah, man, if that makes you happy and that keeps you happy doing tandems, man, like go for it. Like who cares?
Jennifer, I noticed that your hand is down, but do you have a question still? I can't find you on here, so. Sorry, oh, there you go.
Hey, no, I'm good. I was just wanting to clarify. I'm not asking whether or not we need a seatbelt on each passenger in the plane. It's about hooking up the laterals, which is the thing that we've been told not to hook the student up to the tandem instructor until you're ready to remove the seatbelts. So I'm not disputing the FAA, which says that we must have the seatbelts.
So you're saying seatbelt and lower laterals at the same time?
Yes. And I can't get them to stop doing that.
Do they have a reason why they are doing that?
Well, the one tandem instructor is, I'm still a newbie and he's much newer than I am. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the drop zone owner is an examiner. And this is the way he teaches. And I'm new at the drop zone, so I'm trying to integrate.
Well, yeah, you don't want to be rocking the boat as a new person. I get it. And I believe and happy and sad at the same time. I think Noah, I don't know if it's been announced yet, but Noah Watts, I think, is going to be heading up the tandem program at UPT. Maybe he gets an anonymous email that says you got an examiner out there who's teaching a thing that I don't really understand. And at the very least, I would love to hear his reasoning behind it. And instead of just chastising it while I don't agree with it, I would love to know what his reasoning is, because while the seatbelt is on, we're staying in the plane. So the reason to have a student hooked to you, where basically the only outcome is going to be if the plane comes down in a controlled or uncontrolled fashion, you having to leave the plane, you've now invited an extra step, and you have big long laterals with hooks flopping all over the place as you're going to get out of a plane, just hoping to get hooked on something. So I don't understand the reason why they would want it on while the seatbelt is on. How to convince him not to do that? I don't know. Reach out to Noah, maybe, or just maybe ask him why. As the examiner there, just be like, hey man, I would love to know why. I'm looking to learn. I'm pretty new. I'm new here. Yeah, I'd love to know why. I showed up at a DZ once, and when there wasn't room on the end of the bench, they had a little bit of a different scenario where they wanted the student on the bench and me on the floor. And it was because the student was smaller and they could fit on the bench where me with the tandem rig couldn't. One or two of the guys got a little funny while it was happening, but I was like, all right, I'll make it through this jump like that. And I went to talk to him later and I was like, hey man, I'd love your reasoning as to why you do that. And he's like, well, because they're smaller and they fit on there. And it's like, well, okay, like I can understand that, but I really like having my students in front of me because I can control them. And in the case of an emergency that I had to get out of the plane quick, I don't want to have to then drag them to the ground and get in front of them and do all that. If one of us is on the bench and one of us is on the floor and I'm behind them, I can just drag them up by the tops and get them hooked up and be out the door. Like, so if it's all the same to you, and he was receptive, he's like, yeah, you know what? That's actually a really good idea. Like, I appreciate your input. So maybe just even starting a conversation with him and just saying, hey man, I'd love to know why. Maybe
I'd like to see it become a BSR.
Yes. And then you could point to a BSR, but two, like, I don't think it's something like that we need, because I think like logic would dictate that it should already be that way. So short of
agree.
Yeah, short of a BSR, maybe just open a conversation and ask them why, and ask them to explain, because you're looking to learn, like in a non-threatening fashion. Just be like, hey man, I'm pretty new. I'd love to get your thoughts on why you do that, because it seems interesting to me, and maybe I could learn something. Let him speak to his ego a little bit, and then maybe you could just figure out why, and then maybe he'd be open to listen. Who knows?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. So I just have a question on the chat, and then I'll go to Joaquin, and then Jamie, I see your hand. So just from Joel here in the chat, thoughts on lowers loosening and reattaching the student harness versus loosening and hooking back to instructor. Also, some DZs rig little pull tabs on the lower buckles and some don't. Those without pull tabs I have had issues with unhooking, and very heavy students, even standing on my feet. Any suggestions there? Okay, so couple of things. As of now, and as of not too long ago, every single candidate that's getting a UPT tandem rating is taught that it is standard practice to unhook the lower laterals, loosen them, and hook them back to the instructor. While Tom was alive, I had a long conversation with him about this. It wasn't his goal to try to force every single tandem instructor out there to rehook up to the lowers, because he thought that was a fight that he wasn't going to be able to win. He wanted to let all of those instructors age out and have every new instructor that was taught be taught with the practice of unhooking the lowers and then hooking them back to the instructor's harness, mostly for the case of emergency procedures. If you had to cutting away with just the uppers hooked could get really ugly. And also multiple times instructors had gotten their steering toggles caught on hanging lowers. So that was an avoidable situation by, at the time, hooking back up to the little plastic rings on the front of the harness, or hooking up to back to the student or back to the instructor's rig. And then for landing, in the event of a hard landing, having those lowers hooked together keeps the tandem pair together, instead of the instructor flipping over the student and possibly breaking necks or injuring and all that kind of stuff. So it is standard now that every single instructor is going to be taught that, and that's what's going to be in the UPT manual. How much that can be enforced? Yeah, everybody's taught that way now. So that was his goal, was to age out the whole only having two hooks connected during the tandem flight or the canopy flight. As far as what I call them, the little cheater tabs, I don't like those things, because what they do over time, and I don't have a tandem harness in front of me, but they bend the ejector lever. The ejector lever has like a little bit of a curve to it. And when those things get put on, over time, they start getting bent like this. And what happens is they don't actually lock into place. The little ball that gives you that click when you close them, that doesn't happen anymore, which means they're more likely to pop open because they're not actually locked in place. So I don't like using those things. I think with a properly adjusted harness, you can unhook those lowers. It is more about technique. And I get that
smaller instructors are going to have a harder time with unhooking those. The one thing I found is it's a lot easier to do them at the same time than it is to do one and then the other. Because when you get one off, it puts twice the load on the other, and then it's really, really difficult to take off. One of the things that I think that causes that, and I'm not going to get too far down into the weeds with student harnessing, I think having the student harness a little bit too long and having the hip junctions a little bit too low in conjunction with having the instructor's harness too short. I'm a fan of having the chest strap while I'm under canopy as high as I can have it without choking myself, because it makes the distance between my upper connection point and my lower connection point a little bit bigger, which in turn makes the tension on the lowers a little bit less under canopy. So if you're having a hard time with unhooking, take a look at where your chest strap falls when you're under canopy. And if you can do it safely and still reach the drogue and have it be comfortable, try lengthening the main lift web a little bit. And then what that's going to do, it's going to take a little bit of that load off those lower connections, and it's going to make them a little bit easier to undo and then loosen and then reconnect. So don't choke yourself with the chest strap, but you know, you're not wearing a sport rig here, you're wearing a tandem rig. And part of that is setting it up not only so that you can reach the handles, but also that you can do these other things while under canopy. And I find that a lot of people tend to run them really short. And if they lengthen them a little bit, they'll find unhooking quite a bit easier.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Excellent. Joaquin, do you still have a question? Oh, all right. So Joaquin, I'm just going to find you here and then ask you to unmute. And then Jamie, I'll be going to you next. There we go.
Okay, the thing it was here, you already answered about the seatbelts and laterals connectors on the takeoff. But the other thing that I'm a little bit concerned that I've been getting questions in last courses that I've been running. It's about the RSL. About connected, they keep the RSL connect, not keep it connect. So I always advise to keep it connect until you land and try to train them how to disconnect the RSL as quick as you can. Why? Because you know that in Mexico, we have a fatality a few years ago with the RSL disconnect. It was a low cutaway, and if the RSL was connected, the sky hood could be saved of those lives. So I always recommend to keep the RSL connect until the end. Don't disconnect it, because if you need you have any situation that you need to cut away the RSL.
Yeah, I lost you there, Joaquin, at the end. But I think that was about disconnecting the RSL on windy days for landing in windy conditions. I've jumped out in Hawaii in some pretty windy conditions, but I know there's windier than that. These people that disconnect their RSL, I'd like to know how many of them have actually had to cut away after landing because it's that windy. Because in theory, it sounds great. Like, oh man, when I land, if I'm getting drug, I'm going to cut away. But how many of them have actually had to do it? And this goes back to that making choices thing. It's like, okay, you're choosing to disconnect that piece of safety equipment so that after you land, you what? Don't get dirty? Or, you know, is there like a volcano behind you that you're going to get drug into that's going to, like, you know, be a bigger threat than possibly not having an RSL hooked up during the canopy ride? And while I get that a lot of the people are going to say, oh, well, I'm disconnecting it lower than I would cut away so that it doesn't matter. You're just introducing the possibility that it doesn't get hooked back up properly. And the more you do that, the more you're just introducing that chance. You're introducing the chance that you might forget it. And like what happened in Mexico, while cutting away at that altitude might not really have been the right choice, at least the RSL would have given them a shot. So, you know, or like I know that students have gotten a hold of handles, you know, like I talked about having the Tandem students' hands occupied with, for me, the steering toggle to 1,500 feet and then lower. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry that I interrupt. It wasn't just the student didn't grab the handles. The reason was that he let the laterals unconnect and the butterfly was open from the clip. It was open. Yeah. So the steering control, the line get caught not on the hook on the butterfly get hooked there. So the Tandem master get freaked out and he cut away, and the line just undo from the butterfly that he was entangled there. That's why it wasn't a dragging canopy on a little free fall, but the RSL was disconnect. Yeah. So that at the end, the student didn't grab the handles. It was just bad procedure on the instructor. When he undo the laterals, he let them hanging around.
Yeah. Even like, so, you know, you have to go with, you know, the cost, risk, benefit, you know, of all those things. What is the risk? Because there is a risk in disconnecting that RSL on every canopy or on windy days or whatever. And what's the benefit of it? You know, like you're already on the ground, and the likelihood that it's going to go sideways on the ground, or, you know, how often are these people cutting away? So I don't know, man. Like, yeah, I've never been a fan of disconnecting the RSL under canopy, just because I see no benefit to it. You know, hell, if it's that windy at a DZ, there better be catchers.
Yep,
you know,
that's
like,
true.
You know, and it adds complexity. It adds a lot of things going on for the instructor at a time where they really need to be focusing. To disconnect the RSL below the hard deck of, I will not cut away below this altitude, and then deal with all that other stuff. It's, you know, it's adding. I don't want to be rigging at that time. You know, I'm already set. I have my flare toggles in, and I'm doing, you know, I'm working on landing. That's not the time for rigging for me. So, yeah, a lot of these are, I don't want to say bad habits, or, you know, every DZ is like its own little ecosystem, and they get taught by certain people, and things that might not necessarily be standard kind of become things that get passed on to new instructors and new instructors. And hopefully that's the reason why we do things like this, why examiners have to go to standardization meetings to make sure that we're not teaching things that really aren't the best practices anymore. So if you ask my opinion, leave the RSL on and forget about it. And if it's so windy that you think you're going to have to cut away when you land, let me see your logbook of how many times you've actually cut away when you landed. So I think it's just better to have it on.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks, Joaquin. Jamie, I'm going to get you to unmute there.
Hey guys, thanks Alison and John for everything that you said so far. It's actually nice to see 30 plus people that I have no idea where everyone's from. So it's kind of cool. I just wanted to just bring up learnings that I had over, I don't know, 24 years in the sport, starting as like a young 16-year-old to where I am now. But going on what John was talking about on like risk and analyzing risk and fundamental stuff, and I know it comes down to seatbelts. I was fortunate enough to be an OH&S officer outside of skydiving as well, with the YMCA and pools and stuff like that. I don't know whether it's a pro or a con. OH&S is a big area. But I have found the learnings from outside of skydiving and risk analysis and OH&S and all their practices that they do to comply with everything that they do there, in helping understand with, I don't know, anything from new packers to my drop zone owners, and having documentation, whether I just do a quick one, or if there's an issue, be like, all right, let's do a full risk assessment on this for like 5 minutes. They usually take about 5-10 minutes, I found. And then everybody understands the why, the full fundamentals, what are the pros and cons and everything. I know the manuals are great, and it's not in the form of a risk assessment, but they're set there. But I was a curious kid. I always wanted to know why or how or why did we make this rule. So I always found it important now with my teachings, me as a examiner and instructor, from first jump to packers to riggers to canoes to whatever, I found that teaching people basic fundamentals and how to analyze risk themselves has become really important for myself and them, so that they fully understand the content that we're trying to portray and the culture that we're trying to portray too. So anyway, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents because I found it really helpful for me. So yeah, but thanks guys.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. No one wants to get talked down to. No one likes to just be told, do it this way. If, we're going to be examiners or head instructors or leaders or whatever, I think it's a great point that you have to put in the why. Why do we do it this way? And, one of the things, again, that Tom had told me during my examiner course was when people need or want or looking for information, he's like, don't make it up, look it up. Go to the manual, show them where to find it in the manual, teach a man to fish, make them self-sufficient, and then talk about why it is that way. Why do we have to have the student in their own seatbelt? And why do we, reconnect or loosen the lowers? Or why do we want to have that RSL? And at the end of the day, everybody's going to make their own choices within the wiggle room that's in those rules. But yeah, discussing why you do a thing or how you came to that decision, because sometimes people might just be like, well, that dude's just telling me to do it because that's how he does it. And I think I have a better way. It's like, hey man, if your way's better, I'd love to know, convince me, and hopefully, and if someone actually convinced me or had me rethinking the way I did something, then hey, maybe we bring that to UPT, or maybe we, just run it up the chain a little bit. But at the very least, at least we're having reasoned arguments behind things and not just do it because I said so. Because people could have really bad practices and then do the whole do it because I said so. But, like you said, I think we should be assessing risk, but we should also be, it's better understanding, knowing how to do a thing, but knowing why you do that thing is way better.
And some great points on that. And I can only speak, obviously, because we're up in Canada, but we have our AIM reports. And as someone as part of the Technical and Safety Committee here in Canada for CSPA, just even having those reports about malfunctions, incidents, accidents, it helps us to identify root causes. And if we see some patterns and trends going on, yeah, absolutely, we're going to call manufacturers, or we're going to look at our systems. And so yeah, that's definitely, digging in is an important aspect. Does anyone else have any questions? I can't thank everybody enough. It's 7:01. I kind of estimated it'd be about an hour and a half. John, thank you. I know it was kind of, Erika thought she might be here all day, and as her day progressed, just did no fun. She's rather sad, but you killed it, my friend.
Well, I appreciate her. I told her once I was up and running, I could talk about tandem stuff for a long time, but what I really needed help with her was getting my notes together and then setting up a time for me to talk to her and just making sure that I was staying on top of this. So that alone, if it wasn't for that effort that she put in, I probably would have forgot this was going on tonight, because that's just how my brain rolls. But no, she's awesome, and again, for putting this on. So
absolutely. And again, for anyone, so the seminar we did last year was very in detail about EPs. So it is in the chat. The link is there. If anyone wants to email me or Gord, we can certainly send that to you. We are Skydive Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada. That's the name of our drop zone as well. Gord will put our email address as well in the chat here just to the side, but it's info@Skydive Vancouver Island. Feel free to email us if you want a copy of that. I'll also be putting a copy of this seminar today up online as well to access for anybody who would like that. And then just before closing up the meeting, I just wanted to let you guys know, this is kind of more specific to our Canadian viewers, but our safety seminar series does continue through the month of April. So next Tuesday, we have for any CSPA instructors, these are our PFFIs, our GCIs, our SSIs, and our JMs. We have our presentation review seminar with Monique Andre. It's next Tuesday. The following Tuesday, April 19th, we have Bill Pentney and team. We've got a host of presenters. We'll be talking about rigging and packing. Bill Pentney is our the chair of the Technical and Safety Committee for CSPA. For anyone else that's a packer, he's also FAA. So anyone out there wants to talk about packing and rigging, you're welcome to join that call as well. And finally, the last of our series will be on April 26th. And it is a safety seminar about free fly and movement. And it's going to be presented by Derek Klassen. So my husband's looking at me with this really funny look like I've forgotten something.
For Monique, really it's for any instructor.
That is true.
It's about recurrency and staying.
It's true. So he just told me that for the instructor one next week with Monique, it really is for any instructor, be it AFF, PFF, but I just thought I don't want to confuse anything. So other than that, again, I can't thank all of you enough for attending. We have people from Greece, from the US, from Mexico, yay. Yeah, so, and John, again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedule to do this for you. We'll look forward to next season, and I wish everybody a safe and fun season this year at your skydiving center. You ever come up to Canada, please come visit the best part of Canada on the West Coast on Skydive Vancouver Island. I'll let you guys all talk and unmute. I am going to stop recording this, however. You guys have a fantastic night.
Thank you very